All right, so today we are going to look at Venn diagrams and how we can use them to help us count things. Okay, now as a side note, these should technically be called Euler diagrams after a famous mathematician named Leonard Euler, who was really the first person to kind of use them, but this Venn guy gets all the credit. So just a little side note for you. But we're going to talk about Venn diagrams because that's the common name for them. So let's look at this. So we're going to say set A is all the set of people in the 11 o'clock English class, which has 15 people in it. Set B is all of the people in the 10 o'clock history class, which has 20 kids in it. Okay, so that means that the intersection of A and B, right, it looks like an N for intersection. So the intersection of them is the students who are in both classes, of which there are 7. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to set up a Venn diagram, right, where we're going to show that, okay, I'm going to draw a circle that's going to represent set A, which is all the people in the English class. And I'm going to draw another circle for set B, but since we know that some students are in both classes, I'm going to draw this so that there's an overlap section, okay? So the people who are in both classes are going to go in this section here, okay? So I know that set A, this English class, I know that there's 15 people in that, so I'm going to make a little note out here. And I know that set B, right, the history class, there's 20 people in that. So I'm going to make a little note out there, okay? Now, the 7 people that are in both classes, right, they're part of this 20, but they're also part of the 15, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 7 here to show that those are the people that are in the overlap of the 2 circles. They're the people who are in both classes. Okay, and then since I know that, since there's supposed to be 20 people in this class altogether and 7 of them are in both, that means that there's 13 people left who are only in this history class. So I'm going to put a 13 over here. So these 2 numbers together make up the total of 20, right? But it's kind of partitioned off. It's sectioned off to the people who are just in the history class versus the people who are in both classes. Okay, and then similarly, there's supposed to be 15 people in this class, this circle, right? But 7 of them are in both. So that leaves me with 8 people who are just in the English class. Okay, so that is the idea of how Venn diagrams kind of set up. All right, now this is a pretty easy one, so we're going to step it up a notch as we kind of go forward. So we can use Venn diagrams to solve simple logic problems. So let's look at this example. There are 100 students who are asked if they're taking psychology or biology, and these are their responses, okay? So we're going to use this to figure out the allotment of all these different students, and then we could potentially answer some questions about it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We know that there's 100 students total, okay? We know some are taking psychology, some are taking biology, some are taking both classes, some aren't taking either class. Okay, so since some of them aren't taking either, we're going to need somewhere outside of our circles to represent that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a box, okay? And this box is going to represent all the people in this problem. And I know that there's 100 students, so I know that there's 100 people in that box. Okay, so inside of that, I'm going to draw my Venn diagram. So here's my overlapping circles, okay, where this is going to be my psych class, and this is going to be my bio class. Okay, so I know that there are 61 students taking psychology. Now, I can't put that number here because some of those students might also be taking biology. I just know that there's 61 who are taking psychology in total. So for right now, I'm just going to write that here, and I'll figure it out in just a minute. I know 18 students are taking both classes. So if they're taking both classes, that's what this section is. That's my overlap. So I can put an 18 there. And then 12 students are taking neither. So I need somewhere to put those 12 students that is not in either of these circles, but is within our box of 100 students. So I'm just going to put them down here, right? They're within the 100 students, but they're not in either of these 2 classes. Okay, great. So that's all the information they gave us. Now we can use this to figure out how many students are just taking psychology and how many students are just taking biology. The ones who are just taking psych, that's pretty easy, right? You know there's supposed to be 61 people in the class and 18 are also taking biology. So all I'm going to do is say, well, what's 61 minus 18? 43. So there's 43 left over. So 43 of them are just taking psychology. 18 of them are taking both. And together, those 2 numbers make up 61. Okay, so that was pretty easy. But now I've got to figure out this section, and I don't know how many kids there are in bio. But what I do know is that there was 100 people in this problem altogether, right? So I started with 100 kids, okay? And we figured out that 12 of them aren't taking either class. And we figured out that 43 of them are just taking psychology. And we figured out that 18 of them are taking both. So how many kids are left over? After we take those 100 people and we subtract out the ones that we can assign somewhere, 27. So I have 27 people left over. So that's how I know how many people are in bio. All right, and then from there, you could answer questions about how many kids are just taking biology or how many kids are just taking psychology. So you can answer questions other than what information is given to you here. Okay, we could even figure out how many kids are in bio, right? Add those two numbers together and then we'd know. All right, so that one wasn't too bad because we only had 2 circles. So the next one that we're going to look at is going to be a little bit harder because we're going to have 3 different things. Okay, so we had 100 students that we asked some questions of in a reading lounge, and they revealed this. Some of them read Time, some of them read Newsweek, some of them read U.S. News and World Report. So that's 3 different magazines. Okay, so this time when I draw my Venn diagram, I need to have 3 different circles. Okay, so I'm going to start with my box to represent my whole problem, right? And I know that there's 100 people because it told me that they surveyed 100 people. All right, and then inside this box, I need 3 circles that are going to overlap, right? So I'm going to have a circle that's going to represent time, and we just want to label these so that we know what we're talking about. I need another circle that overlaps with that one, all right, and that one's going to represent Newsweek. But then I need another circle that's going to overlap with these guys, right? And I need it sometimes for it to just overlap with Time and sometimes just overlap with Newsweek and sometimes overlap with both of them, right? So this circle I'm going to draw like so. So this is going to be my circle that represents U.S. News and World Report, but we'll just write U.S. News. Okay, it turned out sort of bigger than those two. It doesn't need to be bigger. That's just, it's also not a very good circle, right? That's just my bad handwriting. But you can kind of see now when we look at this, right? There's this section in the middle that's the overlap of all 3 of these circles. So these are going to be the people that are taking or that read all 3 of these newspapers. This little section right here, this is the overlap of Time and Newsweek, but not U.S. News, right? This part right here is just the overlap of these top 2 circles. So those are going to be people who only read 2 newspapers, Time and Newsweek. Okay? This section right here would be people who only read Newsweek. Okay? This section, those are the people that read Newsweek and U.S. News, but they don't read Time because they're not in the Time circle. Right? This section right here, they read Time because they're in the Time circle. They read U.S. Newsweek because they're in the U.S. Newsweek circle, but they don't read regular Newsweek because it's not part of that circle. Okay? So that's kind of how we're reading this. So let's go ahead and start filling in this information. So first of all, it tells us that 40 people read Time. Okay, and I always have students who are tempted to put that number here, but that's not what it says. It just says that they read Time. They could also read Newsweek. They could also read U.S. News. They could read all 3 of them. We don't know yet. So I'm just going to right now make a little note to myself that there's 40 people who read that magazine. So altogether, all 4 of these sections in this circle are going to need to add up to 40 people. Okay, similarly, 30 people read Newsweek. So Newsweek is 30 people, which means that all 4 sections in this circle are going to need to add 30. Okay, 25 read U.S. News. So 25, so these 4 sections are all going to have to add up to 25 people. Okay, so the next thing that we know is that 15 people read Time and Newsweek. All right, and you might say, oh, Time and Newsweek, that's this section right here. But here's the problem, okay? It doesn't say that they only read those 2 newspapers, right? They read Time and Newsweek, but they could also read U.S. News, in which case they might be in this section. So when I know that that's 15 people, it's got to be 15 people between these 2 sections. And I don't know how that lays out. Maybe there's 1 here and 14 here. Maybe there's 5 here and 10 here. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to kind of come back to that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to circle that bullet point and come back to it in a minute because I don't really know where to put that yet. Okay, 12 people read Time and U.S. News and World Report. So they read Time and U.S. News. So again, you might think it would be here, but it doesn't say they don't read Newsweek. So it could be in either of these two sections. Those 12 people take up these two sections, but I don't know how exactly. So again, I'm going to circle that and come back to it. All right, 6 people read only. All right, that's the key word. They only read Newsweek and U.S. World Report. So this number I can actually write down, right? Here's Newsweek, here's U.S. News and World Report, and they only read those two, meaning they don't read Time. So it can't possibly be in this section. It has to be here that those 6 people fall. Okay, because they only read those 2 papers. They do not also read Time. So that word only, that's the difference between these two. It's just one word. They said they only read these 2 versus these guys, it doesn't say only. It could be all 3. All right, and then the last thing we know is that 4 people read all 3 magazines. Perfect, that's this guy right here. Okay, so that's right in the middle. Okay, so that's helpful because now those 2 bullet points that I circled, that's going to give me some more information. So when it said 15 people read Time and Newsweek, right, we said that that's got to be these 2 sections together is 15 people. Well, if 4 are here and it has to be 15 total, that means that there's got to be 11 people there. So those 2 sections together make up 15 people. Okay, and again, the reason that's different than the 6 that we just popped in is that it was 6 people who only read these 2 papers versus 15 people that just read these 2 papers. They might also read other things. Not like these 6 people, they only read 2 papers. Okay, so now we got that one done. And then the 12 people that read Time and U.S. News, so Time and U.S. News, this has to be 12 people between these circles. So that means this section has to be 8, right? So they'd add up to 12. Okay, great. Now that gives us pretty much everything we need. So when we take a look at this guy, I can now figure out this last section, right? There's 40 people in this circle total, right? And right now I've accounted for a bunch of them. So if I take those 40 people that are supposed to be there and I take away the people I've already accounted for, these 8, those 4, those 11, that leaves me with 17 people left over. Lovely. All right, the Newsweek Circle, there's supposed to be 30 people. So if I take those 30 people and I take out the 11, the 4, and the 6 that I've already accounted for, that leaves me with 9. Okay, U.S. News was supposed to be 25. So I take out the 8, the 4, and the 6 that I've already accounted for. That leaves me with 7 people there. All right, lovely. And now we are almost done, but not quite because we haven't figured out the people who don't read any of these newspapers. Remember, there was 100 people total. I've already accounted for a bunch of them, and I want to see who's left over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those 100 people, and I'm going to subtract out everybody that we've already accounted for. So those 17 people, those 8 people, these 4 people, those 11 people, those 9 people, the 6 people there, the 7 people there, and that's everybody, right? That's all the sections. That leaves me with 38 people left over. So I know that there are 38 people that are not in either, or that don't read any of those newspapers. They might read something else, but they don't read any of these 3. Okay, and that's how you kind of set up a Venn diagram. Now, when we got to this last step, you could have shortcutted it a little bit. Like you could have said like, oh, well, if I know all of these add up to 40, you could have just done 100 minus 40 and then subtracted the extra bits. That would work too. So you can shortcut that subtracting a little bit, or you can just subtract them all, one at a time. All right, and that is the basic idea of Venn diagrams. Now, next time we're going to look at more complicated Venn diagrams, but this is the basic idea, and it's really important that you have a handle on the general idea of it before you move on to the ones that are a little bit harder.